Hi there, Steve Kaufman here. Today I want to talk about a subject that comes up quite often, and it's about whether one can learn two languages at the same time. And I'm going to talk a bit about my experience. Before I get into that, though, I want to make a confession. I am not very with it when it comes to technology. My son Mark gets annoyed when I have to ask him for the most simple things. But nevertheless, I use technology a lot and it's certainly enriched my experience as a language learner. But I tried to record, in fact, I did record a discussion with Richard Simcott in English and in French. I think they're quite interesting. When I listen to them on my desktop, I can hear both voices. When I uploaded the recording to YouTube, people can only hear Richard and they're left trying to lip read what I have to say. Now, it's more important to listen to Richard, but still, I'm going to try to figure out, and if anybody has any advice on how to get my voice on there, I would greatly appreciate it. Just before I get on to the subject of two languages at once, talking about technology, I didn't know, for example, that you could use this little stylus with my iPad, or with my iPhone for that matter, iPad, which I use. I use Link on my iPad. It is a lot easier with a stylus. I hardly recommend anyone who's not aware of it, who might be as much of a retrograde as I am, get a stylus. They're $3, $8, $10. I see different prices on the internet. I bought mine for $10. I'm going to get another one for my wife. They're great. Speaking of technology, I'm going to be using a little microphone like this called a snowflake, which replaces my snowball, and no real reason except that I got one for Yarda in the Czech Republic, and I'm going to use it when I go traveling, and I'm just curious to see if any of you notice any difference in the sound quality. Now, getting back to, one other thing too. Let's get into the subject of two languages. I've always taken the position that I need to concentrate on one language at one time, and therefore I have avoided learning two languages at the same time. Now, recently I've been concentrating my efforts on Czech, and I've kind of been allowing my Russian to languish. So I've noticed that my Russian has become a little bit rusty. I started up with some conversations. In fact, I have had some conversations, but I noticed that it's slipping a bit. I think some of my tutors might have noticed that it's slipping. I might have a conversation a week or two. Now, and of course with my Czech, I'm making progress, but while I have had discussions in Czech, I do very poorly in these discussions. In fact, at Link, I can see how many discussions I've had in each. I've had about 250 in Russian over, I think, a 3 year period, and I've had 25 in Czech. Now, what I decided to do is I decided that this past week I would only work on Russian and leave the Czech aside. And I've decided to try to alternate 1 week of Russian with 1 week of Czech. And the reason I'm doing that is this. I always say in language learning there are the three key elements: motivation, the time with the language, and then developing the ability to notice. Those are the key three things. Now, I have lots of motivation, no shortage. Time is a problem. Trying to find the time to learn languages because I like doing other things. I like, sports. I like, I have my company to at least be involved with. I don't really run it on a day-to-day basis. I mean, there's lots of things to do. There's just not enough time. I kind of feel that it's possible that you can achieve more, because I do want to improve my Russian, maybe if you alternate. And here's why I think it could be possible, and we'll find out what happens. As this book says, the one that I recommend and I mention quite frequently is Lernen by Manfred Spitzer. Gehirnforschung und die Schule des Lebens. In other words, brain research and the school of life. But he talks about lifelong learning, but one of his, and it's an excellent book, and talks about the brain and learning, and one of his many gems in there is the fact that the brain requires repetition and novelty. I think it's perhaps a bit like, exercise, if you always do the same exercise, if you always run the same distance, if you always lift the same weights, after a while the brain gets used, or the muscles get used to it. So in order to introduce, and I have, in terms of my own learning, let's say of Czech, I do alternate between easy material and difficult material. But I think this is going to be interesting to try to alternate 1 week of each. One thing I did find was that leaving my Russian, of course my Russian became a little bit rusty when it came to using it. It didn't affect my ability to read it or to understand it. If I downloaded some interviews from Echo Moskwy, I had no trouble understanding it. But my ability to marshal up my words and to speak correctly seemed to decline. 1 week on Russian, I'm ahead of where I was. So that my period of time with the Czech has improved my Russian. Why is that? I think because when I haven't had the Russian, I go back to the Russian, I'm learning it again. I don't know, it just seems to be that this novelty factor stimulates the brain. The other thing that I have been doing, and I mentioned it in a previous video, in order again to develop my attentiveness when it comes to cases. And I'm not at all prevented from understanding the Russian that I read, but I make mistakes when I speak. I use the cases incorrectly. I don't know what percentage I hit correctly. Is it 50, 60, 70%? I don't know. It comes from a lack of attentiveness in my mind. If I can train the brain better, even while reading, I think that the brain will get more used to these cases, and I hope I said cases, not tenses, cases, and therefore will produce them better because it'll have a better sense. It'll be more alert to, more attentive to the overall picture of cases. So in reading my Russian, I don't have the book handy, but I'm reading the biography of Alexander II, and I am writing down a number. So one for the nominative, and these are my numbers. Other people have different numbering systems, but this is the one that makes sense to me. 1 for the nominative, 2 for the accusative, 3 for the genitive, 4 for the dative, 5 for the instrumental, and 6 for the prepositional case. So I just write these down. I feel that that has really improved my ability to speak Russian. I've had a number of Russian conversations this past week, and I feel that I've done better than in the past. So I'm going to alternate. However, the other thing that I'm going to do is I'm only going to read and listen to Czech. I'm not going to speak Czech for the next long while. So that in the week that I'm on Czech, I just listen and read. Because honestly, I'm tired of struggling with these conversations with our tutors. I may do the odd one, maybe once a week, but no more than that. Whereas I'll do 4 or 5 a week in Russian. And the reason is that I know from my reading, I know that my Czech reading is improving a lot. And I read so much more comfortably now than before. And I know that I can accumulate through all the material that I've uploaded and that I'm listening to and reading, I can accumulate this vocabulary and this familiarity with the language. So I'm quite happy to wait another few months before engaging in conversation. And I feel that if I try to speak both Russian and Czech, I'm going to confuse them. And it's going to be bad for my Czech and bad for my Russian. So for the next few months, at least that's the plan, we'll see what happens, I'm going to sort of listen and read off and on Czech and Russian, but I'm going to stay with Russian as the main language that I speak. So in the week that I'm strong on Russian, I'll probably have 5 or 6 or 7 conversations, and when it's a Czech week, I might have 1 or 2 just to maintain the Russian. So that's going to be the plan, the strategy, vis-a-vis learning 2 languages at the same time. I should explain in that regard that, one of the things that I've enjoyed in the last few days, I've had conversations with Luca, I had a conversation with Richard Simcott. These are 2 of the sort of better known polyglots on the internet. And where we agree is, obviously, that you need passion, you need motivation for the language, but that we also need to do the things that we enjoy doing. Everyone agrees with this. And Richard has certain things that he likes doing, Luca has things that he likes doing, and I do the things that I like doing. And each one of you, or every learner, has to decide what they like doing. So they can listen to me, they can listen to Richard, Luca, Benny, whoever, and they have to decide what they best like doing, because that's probably going to work best for them. So in my case, I'm not that interested in speaking early. To me, language learning is not a race. It's not the first guy off the blocks. It's not a 100-yard dash to see who can say things. And my own view, again, this is me, I think that in schools where we try to get people to produce the language correctly, early, personally, I'm against that. I think it's asking us to perform before we're ready. And we don't need to perform. To me, language learning is a long walk, a long journey. In fact, getting to where you can say a few things is quite easy. Getting to where you are comfortable with a wide variety of content where you can read and listen to many things takes a long, long time because it requires a lot of words. If I don't understand something, it's because I don't have the words. It's not the grammar that prevents me from understanding. And if I understand well, I will be able to speak. If I can speak and I don't understand, I can get myself into trouble. So that's me, okay? I know that Richard, for example, is taking a course in Turkish, which he really enjoys, and he finds that it provides him with additional stimulus, motivation, friendship, contact with the culture, and so forth. Luca, for example, has a technique which he describes as bilingualism, where he likes to deal with translated texts, and he likes to translate from the new language into his language, from his language back into the new language. I don't have the discipline to do that, so I don't do it. But that's not to say that either one of those approaches are bad. I am sure they're very effective. You have only to see the results with Richard and Luca to see that both those approaches work very well. They work very well because they like doing them. And because they like doing them, they do them enough so that it works for them. And the brain likes doing it, so the brain enjoys that kind of activity and learns. One other thing I should mention when it comes to polyglots and people who speak many languages, you'll hear the discussion that Richard and I have where we talk about the importance of talent. We think that that's not a big issue. We think that you develop the skills the more you study, but you can listen to that if I ever get the technical problems resolved. So I think that a person, a so-called hyperglot, is someone who's just very interested in learning languages, learns one, then another, then another. But nevertheless, there was a book written called Babel No More about these so-called hyperglots. And partly as a result of that, I think, Global Television in Toronto is going to do a television program, 1-hour television program on the subject of hyperglots. So I don't know what all is going into the program. It is my understanding that Richard is involved in some way, and that a number of international polyglots are involved in this story, and that the Global TV has scoured the internet to find some Canadian hyperglots, and lo and behold, towards the bottom of the barrel, they found me. So I am being flown to Toronto to participate in this panel discussion, which will probably be reduced to a small portion of this program. It's quite inconvenient for me because it comes during the Easter weekend, and it comes in the middle of a old-timers hockey tournament. So I have to fly out of here Friday noon, and I return Saturday afternoon. And Toronto is not that close to Vancouver. It's about a 4.5-hour flight. But I think it's very interesting that they're doing this program, and I hope that it stimulates more interest in language learning, amongst the people who will be watching the program. So there you have it. I apologize for the technical failure of our first discussion with Richard, my discussion with Richard. I hope that I'll be able to salvage that interview tomorrow when I speak to people like Alex and Mark who are more technically competent than I am. Thank you for listening. Bye for now.